Well, good evening, everybody. Back for this week's episode of Communications and Cigars. I'm your host, John Crook. I thank you very much for going ahead and last week we moved last week's episode to this week. So last week's episode was supposed to be this. I want to first go ahead and say thank you for everybody for understanding. You know, this time of the year it's kind of weird. There's like, you know, I wouldn't say it's a flu bug or something like that, but something was going around hitting the family, and I put my family first before my hobbies and everything else like that. So what we did was we said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and we're not going to do a show this week. And you know what? That happens from time to time. Okay. That's why Jay Leno was there for Johnny Carson kind of deal. But I didn't have anybody step in to do my show. But I do appreciate everybody that did understand. And I'm going to actually turn my mic down here. I see it's a little hot there. But I do appreciate everybody that, you know, bared with me and everything like that on there. So welcomes to this week's episode, Demystify DMR. Yes. So, what is demystifying DMR or demystify DMR? Well, tonight's episode is going to talk about DMR. We're not just talking about amateur. We're not just talking about business. We're going to kind of take a look and understand DMR better. Okay. And, I'll be honest with you. Well, you know, we'll say that for what bends my antenna. How about that? But the reason I wanted to talk about DMR is because there's not a lot of education on the different digital voice modes. And I think we're going to be starting working through a little bit of a series here over the next couple of weeks, probably turn in a couple months, where we're going to start to visit the individual digital modes. I know a lot of people that are out there that do a lot of good job with explaining digital modes and stuff like that on there. But I think it's a responsibility as basically people that present education, present content, that we present it directly, we present it correctly, and kind of everything like that on there. Now, the reason that we started with DMR is because, once again, on the show, we're not just about ham radio. We're about a lot of different things. And I've been working on my networks here a little bit. So as I was sitting down at the computer, delving into this, looking at all these kind of things like that, that's when it kind of struck me as like, you know what? I think people maybe see like this little kind of section of DMR or something on there. So what better way to kind of actually make people understand a digital voice technology, and not, once again, not just for an amateur base, but for public safety, or not public safety. Well, public safety actually kind of to a degree uses DMR. More so your public works people, those kind of things like that on there. But that's what tonight's episode is going to do about. We're going to talk about the ETSI standard, ETSI, the European Telecommunications Standard Institute, which deals with it. We're going to do a little bit and start to kind of build off some of the things on there about learning about bandwidth and stuff, and why DMR was created and the purpose of it all on there. So before that, if you ever have any sort of questions or comments about the show or anything like that, please feel free to hit me up at communications-cigars at jjkcom.com. JJK Communications is a nice sponsor of Communications Cigars. Lets us have all this kind of fancy equipment to a degree, and kind of actually some of the stuff that we get to play with on there and nicely on there. So yeah, we do thank for the support of JJK Communications. But before we jump into our cigar portion, before we jump into the show, let's go ahead and take a look at the ham fam, or the show fan that's popping in there. So I'm going to go through here to list for Plasma Storm 73. Good evening, Evan. Good evening, Ape. Thanks for coming in. Yes, you were close to first, but not quite there. Lon, good evening. David, KY4GM, Brian, AD8GI, Ben Manley, James, KI5OEB, Chuck, KB8YIT, Liberty Cave, WS7PB. Who else we got? We got Derek, W9RDY, and Temporary Offline. Thank you for popping in there. Let's see who else. Marvin, thank you very much. Christopher, Wild Cascadia Radio, Shooter Ready Standby. Wow, this is good. You know what? I gotta say, I do have to appreciate, you know, T.O. has his show and Ham Nuggets usually before this one, and I do appreciate everybody that goes to T.O.'s show, comes on over to this one here. We got Chuck checking in here, KK6USY. You know, it's really nice. I do appreciate that. It does mean a lot to me on here. As I've told in the past, the channel was created for the pure simple fact of talking about communications in general on there. And I'm going to go ahead and give a shout out to the group on there, Coffee and Ham Radios. Saturday and Sunday mornings. Yes, Saturday and Sunday mornings, 9 a.m. Central. So, not sure where people might be at. 10 a.m. Eastern, and then 8 Mountain, and then 7 on Pacific in the morning there. But Saturday and Sunday mornings, Coffee and Ham Radios, they always have a good topic on there. And that's kind of actually part of it. Guys, I kind of stole a little bit of idea about tonight's episode from there. You guys were talking about DMR, and it was really great on there. But for me, I always like to get to the nitty gritty. I'm one of those people that always has been called and yelled at and saying, John, you just maybe sometimes need to look at the time. You don't need to know how the watch works. Wrong. I do. Okay. I do, because in my mind, it's one of those things where, hey, maybe if there's something that I can learn more, that's how we advance. That's how can we apply new things on there. So with that, let's move in our cigar portion. And you know what, cigar portion? Hey, it's April. Believe it or not, I know everybody sit down. It was over 40 degrees today in Wisconsin. I know it was a shocker, but this actually kind of comes to a good time of the year. People are going to start getting into spring cleaning and stuff, or maybe they might start opening their windows or doors. So weather gets a little bit better and everything like that. Let's talk about humidors once again. If you have an electronic humidor or electrical humidor, and those are usually ones that the average electrical humidor. And when I say electrical, because there are some humidors which are just a box and they have like the little dry silica packets in there to keep moisture down and to keep humidity right and everything like that. I'm talking if you actually have an electrical cabinet one that either has a motor in there which will keep things cool, or if you have one in there that actually does not only keep things cool but will actually heat, because they have some coolers and heaters on there and everything. Now's a good time to actually go ahead and change the stuff on there. Alrighty. Basically, you can, in the back, like on mine on there, I have a really nice one, and thank you very much for my wife for going ahead and getting that for me. But it actually does have a filter on there that I can go ahead and clean. Keeping a humidor clean is going to keep your cigars longer. It's going to help keep your cigars, especially if you tend to vary the range on there. So in the spring as well as the fall, don't be afraid when you change your smoke alarm batteries to go ahead and give your humidor a cleaning on there. Because even though it's a filter, you know what, that stuff can suck some of that stuff in there, and then that's the last thing you need is to start to get dirt or dust or other things into your humidor cabinet. That's going to be very, very problematic on there. So without further ado, let's demystify DMR, shall we? So, for our episode tonight, we actually have to do a few things. We have to understand some basics. And here's why we need to understand basics. Real quickly, the reason we're moving to digital voice technologies is because digital voice is going to allow us to narrow that bandwidth that we're using. So on here, I'm going to use the street. I always liked using this example when I've taught classes and stuff, and that's what's happening here. So on your screen here, you see a nice street, right? It's a 4-lane street here, and guess what? These 4 lanes represent the normal, regular, quote-unquote, 25 kilohertz bandwidth. Alrighty? That's going to be your normal bandwidth. Now, for amateurs, we're looking at that as your normal repeater kind of bandwidth on there. As we were looking at public safety stuff, we've kind of gone away from that because we were forced to narrowband things on there in certain portions of the certain bands. So like portions of VHF, portions of UHF. Other portions did not require a narrowband, and there's actually still some channels that are out there available for use for public safety agencies and stuff that are wideband. A good example is the frequency of 152.0075. That frequency is used a lot by hospital pagings. It's a medical paging channel. It was allowed to remain wideband. But this is your general concept on there. I know you might be asking me, John, this is really simple stuff. Why are we talking about this? Just bear with me, folks. Bear with me. You'll see in a minute here. Alrighty. So what we did is we came around with narrowband. And what narrowband said was, okay, we're not going to make one whole road that one lane. What we're going to do is we're going to break it down. And what we're going to do in this narrowband is we're going to basically take that giant road and we're going to make it into 2 sections. So the top half in this case is 12.5 kilohertz, and the bottom half in this case is 12.5 kilohertz. Obviously, 12.5 plus 12.5 does equal 25. I know that. I went to public school. But what I'm saying here, this is now what we can do is we can actually squeeze more conversations in together, because now when we go narrowband, we were able to do what they call splinter frequencies. We were no longer required to do like 100, 105, or 10 or 110 or 115, right? We didn't have to do that 5 kilohertz stepping that we're usually so used to on there. Now we could actually go like to 6.25, or we could go to 12.5, or even some cases we can go to actually 2.5 kilohertz stepping. And that would allow you to do splinter frequencies. And then, as I kind of talked about before, what we're doing is we're now going to interlace channels together. So before that normal, hey, bandwidth channels, let's say, 15 kilohertz. Well, guess what? Now with narrowband, we actually can put a frequency that is 7.5 kilohertz between the two. So we have the two ones here, 15 kilohertz apart. Now we can put one right in the center. So why go digital? This is a big question. Why go digital? Well, because now what you can do is you can sometimes hear what they call ultra narrowband. And what that means is that on our display here, each lane is a separate frequency, a separate voice channel, voice path, data path, whatever you want to call it on there. It's a separate frequency that's on there. Now, this is important because in order to achieve the 6.25 kilohertz channel spacing, what we need to do is we need to somehow condense it down. Now, you can only compress analog or FM so far, and then you need to step into basically digital. Because what's going to go down this path here, ones and zeros are going to go down nicely. Voice, it's not going to go down nicely. It's going to be problems. It's going to be too compressed. It may not even happen at all. And if you do, the problem with FM voices is that if you overmodulate, you spill over into those other frequencies on there. Now, this is important to understand because you're going to see tonight when we demystify DMR why this plays a significant portion into it. So let's first start out. DMR is a standard. So ETSI, ETSI, not the ETSY that I need to go ahead and sell yarn or something on. I don't know. My wife deals with that, not me. But ETSI, ETSI in this case, stands for European Telecommunications Standard Institute. And what ETSI did is they said, you know what? We're going to come up with a digital voice technology. And with this digital voice technology, we are going to set standards on it. And the reason they wanted to set standards is because they did not want, for argument's sake, a bifurcation, a fractionation of the protocol on there. It still happened. We'll get to that in a minute here. But basically, what it is it's saying, okay, if you are going to create a DMR radio, it needs to be able to fit this design. It needs to be able to do the air interface. And you need to be able to do DMR voice and generic services, data protocols, trunking protocols. So what this is doing is basically saying and stopping one company from coming up and saying, oh, our radio is a DMR radio. You can use it to talk to any other DMR radio. And then company B comes along and is saying, oh, our radio is a DMR radio. I could go ahead and talk to any other DMR radio. And then the two can't talk to one another because something is wrong. The protocol is wrong or something like that on there. That's where the ETSI standard came out. Now, I want to point out this. If you look at the version numbers on there, so the general system design hasn't changed much, okay? It's version 1.4.1. But notice how where the DMR interface, the DMR voice and generic services, those are actually up to version 2 because they've started to advance on there. The data protocol has kind of advanced a little bit on there too. Not a whole heck of a lot, but a little bit on there. But the DMR trunking protocol really came to light in 2017. And I'll explain why in a little bit here, a little bit later on. And it has to do with a bat wing. I'm sure everybody figured that one out. All right. What they also did is they said, you know what? We're going to break DMR radios down into tiers. And this is where some people kind of got confused. And this is where I see one of the largest difficulties of understanding what a radio is. Because some people say, I have a DMR radio. Okay, yes. What kind do you have? Well, I have a Kenwood, or I have a Baofeng, or I have a Motorola, or I have a Harris, or this or that. Okay, okay. But what can your radio do? Well, it can do DMR. Okay. What can it do in DMR? Well, DMR. What tier? Well, there's no tier, just as a DMR radio. Aha, no, there is. And this is a good thing, folks. I know it seems like people may say, oh my God, you get bogged down in these like things, but it really truly is a good thing, because what happened is that tier 1 DMR was basically for the unlicensed PMR radio service. And we're going to break these down all there. Tier 2 was the conventional standard. So basically what you're using with repeaters. And then tier 3 deals 100% with trunking, how trunking works. Now this is, once again, there's the DMR ETSI tier 3 standard, and then some other companies had to make their own. So that's why we're going to cover that. That's why it's really, really important to figure that out on there. Alrighty. Tier 1 is unlicensed. And if when you bought a Baofeng DMR radio, when they first came out, this is not a knock on Baofeng, just everybody relax. But what happened is that the tier 1 standard, as you see, dealt with 446.0 megahertz to 446.2 megahertz. Now, here's the thing. This is a European standard. This is not a US thing. That's why there's really no DMR tier 1 in the US, because they dealt with this. So what is DPMR, John? What would be the equivalent? Well, for sake of a better term, I would go ahead and associate that with like the business frequencies. You know how we have the UHF business frequencies on there, 50, 90 something now, I think for I think it's for UHF, and like 27 or something for VHF. That's kind of what DPMR is in there, but it was actually PMR, personal mobile radio. They added the D because it now became digital. But here's what happened is it used FDMA technology, because TDMA requires syncing. TDMA requires that. So I'll get to that one second. And then what ended up happening was that with DPMR, now you could have 4 paths in 25 kilohertz or 2 voice paths in 12 kilohertz. So this worked out really well for the UK, where once again the standard came from, because now what could happen is that you could have, I don't know what the equivalent would be, like let's say they have a Walmart and they have a Target and stuff, and what could happen is that those frequencies could be really close together. So you could have 4, let's say, of the DPMR frequencies that you used, and they were 6.25 kilohertz, they were digital, they could be all nice and tight tucked together, and then the DPMR radios could be used over, let's say, at the Target, and their frequencies were tight and tucked and everything like that in there. So this was really, really good for them. And if you take a look, they only had 200 kilohertz of open space. By the way, this is another exact reason why the amateur band in the UK is only 430 to 440. So kind of an interesting point on there. But that was tier 1. Now, why did I bring this up? Why did I say it? Because what happened was DMR was, when we were getting the cheaper DMR radios. Yes, they're cheaper. Okay. What was happening is that people were saying, oh, they're DMR, they're DMR, they're DMR. Even the company was saying, they're DMR, they're DMR, they're DMR. And then what ended up happening, they looked at them and they said, this is not DMR. You can't talk on the repeater or anything. Correct, because they were tier 1 radios, which is simplex only. Simplex only. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the next tier, which is tier 2, conventional. Now, this is actually kind of interesting. When I've known this before and kind of done this, the frequency range actually is part of the standard ranges all the way down from 66 megahertz all the way up through 960 megahertz. Now, we don't really have anything in 66 megahertz in there. I mean, realistically, we would have some low band stuff, but DMR isn't designed to go down in there. So really, we're looking at VHF, we're looking at UHF, we're looking at 800, we're looking at 900 on there. So you see it's on there. Now, what happens is that in this case, remember we went back, we talked about 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth channels. That's what it is here. So as you see in this picture here, this is all 12.5 kilohertz. This is all 12.5 kilohertz. And what's happening is that with TDMA, with DMR, it's basically transmitting in slots. And these slots are 30 milliseconds each. So actually, if you were to ever take a scanner, an analog scanner, and listen to a DMR radio talking into a repeater, what you would actually hear is you'd hear it go kind of like a motorboat, kind of like a weird kind of airplane sound. And the reason being is because that radio, that handheld radio, that mobile radio, what you're talking into the repeater on, it's keying, unkeying every 30 seconds. That's what DMR does. It keys and unkeys every 30 seconds. That's why you can't actually use like amplifiers on handhelds and stuff unless you get a specific one. Now, repeater, different. When a repeater transmits, it's actually transmitting both time slots on there. But this is where it kind of comes into play, because what's happening now is this orange and blue, I'll call it, that is one time slot. Let me back it up. There's two time slots in there, but it's one frequency for 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth. That's why DMR is popular in the business world, because now what you can do is you can have two simultaneous conversations taking place on one frequency, one repeater, because of this time slot allotment. And the time slots don't do it. That's why when you key up a DMR radio, whether you're, and this, once again, it's not just amateur, this is in business and public safety, you have to go ahead and have the channel grant from there. So what you're doing is you're keying up, and then it would be like on there, whatever that sound might be, that's the one that you have. And the reason you have to have that channel grant on there is because what happened is you transmit it into the repeater says, yes, there is space on the repeater, and it sends a sync packet back to you. So now your radio is going to sit and saying, yep, I'm only listening to time slot 1, only listening to time slot 1 on there. So that is the tier 2 conventional. Now, tier 2 is made up of 3 main components. Besides the frequency. Obviously, you know the frequency, but there's 3 main components on there. You need to have color code, you need to have time slots, and you need to have talk groups. Alrighty? This is what steers you into the repeater. This is what steers your transmission to the other users. This is what may steer your transmission down the network. This is what may steer your whatever. Okay? That's what it's going to do. You need these 3 components to go ahead and be able to do that. And they're not that hard. So we're first going to talk about color code. What is color code? So as you see there's kind of like the blue arrow underneath the blue lightning bolt and above the red lightning bolt. Think of the color code as, for argument's sake, a CTCSS or PL tone to get into the repeater. Alrighty. So what that means is that I have to have a color code to be able to access the repeater. So a repeater will have, or could have, a range of anywhere from 0 to 15. 0 would kind of be open or carrier squelch kind of deal. And then 1 through 15 would be the color codes. Does it matter which color code you use? No, it really does not. Well, then what is the purpose of a color code? Well, once again, take a look at the business aspect of what DMR was designed for. What would happen is let's say you have 2 factories. It's all one company, but you have the 2 factories, 2 buildings right next to one another, a left Twix and a right Twix, okay? What happens is maybe you have the one repeater next door in the other factory, and they're on color code 1. And you have your repeater here on color code 2. What that allows you to do then is just like it normally would for a repeater using PL tone. I won't access repeater 1 if I'm using the repeater that has color code 2, and vice versa. In addition, when you start to play with all the different DMR technologies and stuff out there, color code can play in regards to routing and remote receive sites and all these kind of things like that on there, which we're not going to get. We're going to kind of stay at a 10,000 foot. Maybe we might drop down to 5,000, maybe every once in a while. Okay. But what's happening is that color code is needed to get into the repeater. And this is where people don't understand. A lot of people, when I hear people talk about DMR, they're like, well, I'm on color code 15. What color code are you on? Well, wait a minute. I'm on talk group 100. Well, I don't have color code 100. I have color code 1 through 15. Color code and talk group are different on there. All right. So color code is the axis of the repeater. Alrighty. Now we get into time slots. And if we think about time slots, think of it nothing more than, are we on the left side of the road or the right side of the road? And that's really what a time slot is. It tells you how you are going to be entering the repeater. Now, they have an option. Now, I said on here option 1 or option 2. So you have time slot 1 or time slot 2. I should have added a little bit more, and I'm going to touch on that in 1 second, which is auto, or sometimes people call it XPT, and there's a couple different things, and I'll explain it in a minute here. But basically what it is so now you've determined your color code. I'm going to talk on the repeater A. It's color code 1. Now when I key up, what side of the road am I going down on? Am I going to go down the left lane or the right lane? And here's what you have to do with time slots. You have to plan it that you determine which one you want to use. Now, when I say which one you want to use, it comes down into what the abilities of the repeater actually are. Okay? So in other words, when you access a repeater, things can be set up that time slot 1 might stay local and time slot 2 might connect out to other repeaters. Or you can have both time slot 1 and time slot 2 local. Or you can have time slot 1 that reaches out and goes out to other repeaters and time slot 2 is local. The biggest thing about it is it's set up by the system designer, the people setting it up. There does try to be standards, but standards are nothing more than, I sometimes joke around saying, people sitting around a table banging their fists saying harumph, harumph, harumph. Okay. But the reason I say this is because in the business world, there really has been no per se standardization on there. In the amateur world, yeah, there's been some standardization on there. And in my system that I have for usage, for business usage and other systems out there, it's all over the board. They may actually have time slot 1 and time slot 2 is able to connect out to other repeaters, but it's all talk group specific or talk group driven, if that makes sense. Now, there's one thing I said about auto time slot. This is starting to become really popular. It became popular with Kenwood on their business side when they were starting to get into DMR. Hytera did it. Hytera kind of calls it XPT, but they kind of call it Auto too. So normally when you have a repeater, okay, if this user in the upper left corner here wants to talk to this user here, they once again need to have the same color code, same time slot, same talk group. But what happens is that if user A and B want to talk to one another and time slot 1 is busy, they would have to know to turn to time slot 2 if time slot 2 was open. But now what ended up happening is that they said, you know what, why do we have to have the selection of talk groups? Why can't we just have what we call auto time slot? Which basically means is that the user in the left-hand side here by the blue lightning bolt simply has their radio programmed to auto, they key up, and whatever time slot is open, because the radio will check both, will go down that first time slot, and then all the other users on the other end are sitting there and their radio is just sitting monitoring the time slots. Oh, hey, I hear that user calling me and it's on auto time slot. So this time I'm going to listen to them on time slot 2 and I'm on that talk group. So it was great. And a lot of people really enjoyed it. And it's great when you do that on a closed system or a very small use system. The issue comes into play is when you have users that are auto assigned a time slot. And then there are users which are fixed time slots. So once again, in our example here, we have the red users in the bottom. They are fixed to time slot 2. They have to stay on time slot 2. The blue users up here, they are on auto time slot. Now, you can have, we'll cover talk groups in a minute, but you can have the same talk group on a different time slot and it won't interfere with one another. But if the blue users key up and then they switch to time slot 2 and they're on the same talk group, guess what? The red users are going to hear them. And they may not even be, they may not even be in the same mission purpose or the need for communication. So that's where it's a great feature, but the system administrators and system designers need to factor that in greatly. Alrighty. So now we're going to move on to talk groups. Okay. So talk groups, you have the range of actually talk group number 1 all the way through actually 16,776,415. Actually, let me back up a little bit. The talk group 16776,415 is usually related to the all-call talk group. Now, that all-call talk group is one where it doesn't really matter what talk group you might be on. It kind of wakes up everybody's radio all at once. You key up on that talk group and it does it. Some people use all-call, some people don't. That's another thing that's on there. In addition, talk groups can either be static or dynamic. And the difference between the two is, once again, how the system is going to be set up. What do you need to have as a talk group that will always come up on the repeater regardless of what people are saying? Now, in a single site system, as you're looking at the screen right now, static's not really that big of a deal. Dynamic is okay. But it really comes into play when we talk about the next one, which is going to be IP Site Connect features on there. So right now, a person uses talk group 100 on the top or the time slot 1, and person uses talk group 750 on the bottom on the what do you want to call time slot 2 on there. Not a problem, not an issue. Once again, talk groups reside within a time slot. So if we actually break this down, we see the repeater and we see the color code. And within the color code, we see the time slots. And within each time slot, we see the talk groups. So in essence, you could have talk group 100 and talk group 750 on the same, I went ahead too fast. Talk group 700 and 100 on the same time slot. So blue can key up on talk group 100, and then maybe that's security. And then blue can key up on talk group 750 on time slot 1. That might be housekeeping. Okay. Red can key up on talk group 750, and that may be maintenance on there. It really doesn't matter. Talk groups can do that. There used to be a thought about people saying that, you know what, you shouldn't have talk groups latch. I've heard people say when setting up a system, you should have odd talk groups on time slot 1 and even talk groups on time slot 2. Semantics is really what it is. It's all going to be there. All right. So taking a look now at IP Site Connect. Now, IP Site Connect, this is where hammies, listen, guys, this is where we're normally used to doing these kind of things. So one of the benefits of DMR is the routing of conversations through a system. So as you can see here, lots going on here. We'll break it down here. So for example, repeater 1, upper left-hand corner, repeater 2, upper right-hand corner, and then repeater 3 is kind of in the middle. We see the red user on time slot 2, talk group 99. Now what's happening is that this talk group 99 on time slot 2 as an example, can go through the whole system. So in this case, what's happening is that time slot 2, talk group 99, and repeater 2 has that talk group active. So now you see user 1 on repeater 1 keying up, and it's going through the internet, through that IP connection to that other repeater on there. Nothing done by the user. The user doesn't have to do anything. The system is set up that way. This is the architect of the DMR infrastructure. This allows them to do this. Not all talk groups are going to carry through a network. An example down below, repeater number 3. They have time slot 1, talk group 54. It only stays on repeater number 3. It does not go out to any other repeaters whatsoever. And this is where things kind of start to branch and things kind of start to make it. And this is where, why, there's a Wisconsin statewide talk group and then another state talk group that breaks down and all these kind of things like this. And once again, it can get really complex to say how you want a talk group routed. Now, if we add more complexity into this, now let's go one step further. Now we're going to go ahead and saying, okay, you know what? Talk group 99 on time slot 2 can only go between repeater 1 and 2. But now what we did is we opened up repeater 2 to allow talk group 54 to come through on time slot 1. So now what you see is repeater 1 talking to repeater 2, time slot 2, talk group 99. And now you see the blue users on repeater 3 with time slot 1, talk group 54. Then that is connecting via the internet here, okay, the IP link to come out also out on repeater 2, time slot 1, talk group 54. So this is why DMR was designed the way that it was, is because now it allows linking, now it allows connectivity, now it allows the basically the abilities to do what it needs to do. Normally, if you think about this, in order to have a conversation at one place with two conversations, we in essence would need right here to have two repeaters, and those repeaters would need to be linked to one another. And that would have to then require a person to change. You see what I'm saying? So this is how it's kind of really, really, really easy to be able to do that with DMR. And this is, once again, IP Site Connect. That's what a lot of people start to use on there. Now, once again, IP Site Connect is a Motorola term. There are different terms based on the manufacturer, but really what it's doing is you're saying you're connecting repeaters together via the internet or an IP traffic thing. It's conventional mode, and then you have certain talk groups that get mapped out on there. Okay, so now what ends up happening is we see this happening. Now, the reason IP Site Connect really goes to the next level is look at this. Now what you can do with IP Site Connect, or what you could do by linking the repeaters, now in digital even, we could take a VHF repeater and link it to a UHF repeater and link it to an 800 megahertz repeater. Now what this does is this allows you to basically say, okay, I can have different frequencies and different repeaters, and they can all still connect together. I will say this. I'm not going to say the hospital because I don't really know if I can if I can say the hospital, or they want their network there. But it's a hospital, and it's a relatively large hospital, very, very, very well-known hospital. And what they do at all their hospitals, they have DMR repeaters set up in this fashion. So in other words, instead of having, this is hospital 1, hospital 2, hospital 3, they actually have the DMR stuff that they can actually talk on one repeater through one hospital, through, like, let's say for example, repeater 1, time slot 2 is their local stuff. But then if they need to, they can go to time slot 1 and connect out to the other hospitals. And then they have the talk groups pointed at the other hospitals. So they have this giant network where one person literally could sit back at one hospital and then just change the channels on their radio. And then next thing you know is they're hopping between time slot 1, time slot 2, and the different talk groups to be able to communicate with the different hospitals on there. All right. Now we're going to get into tier 3, which is trunking. And it was kind of like, man, should I almost do trunking first and to give there? But here's what trunking really is. Trunking is basically the reusing of repeaters together. So if you take a look at this example here, don't pretend any of this stuff right here. So let's say you have a yellow repeater, a blue repeater, and a gray repeater. What would end up happening is those would used to be conventional setups. What would happen is I was trying to call someone on the yellow repeater and they didn't answer, or yellow was busy, then I needed to go to the blue repeater, and I'd have to change the channel on the radio. Okay, blue repeater's not available because it's busy, or I'm calling the person that's not there. Okay, change the channel again. Now I have to go to the gray repeater. So what trunking did is it said, no, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take and we're going to link everything together. Now, caveat, there's many different forms of trunking, but we're going to be talking about control channel trunking. And if you're a scanner user, you understand this. Okay, control channel now basically says, okay, you know what? I'm going to sit here, and as the repeater site system, I'm going to say, hi, I'm the repeater, hi, I'm the repeater, hi, I'm the repeater. And all of a sudden, next thing you know is you turn on a radio, and the radio affiliates to the system. It says, hi, system, can I be on your repeater? And the control channel says, yeah, sure, come on. What do you want to be on? Oh, I want to be on this talk group and this and this. Ooh, yeah, no, you can't be on there. Oh, yeah, you can be on there. Or there may be sometimes where the radio turns on and be like, hi, can I be in your system? Nope, you're not allowed here. Go away. Bye-bye. So that's kind of trunking in a nutshell. The control channel is basically the headmaster, the school marm, the president, the governor, whatever you want to call it. And what ends up happening is each time someone keys a radio on a trunk system, the radio sends out data. So it sends an ID, it sends out the request for the talk on the talk group, whole bunch of different data things on there. The control channel says, I hear you. Alrighty, I'm going to move you, in this case, to the blue channel. Traffic channel A is what we call in this diagram here. And what happens also, too, is all the radios that are just sitting there waiting on the control channel says, okay, anybody that wants to talk on talk group 100, you now need to listen to the blue channel. And instantly, everybody goes over to the blue channel. Now, how fast is that? That's like 100, 200, maybe 300 milliseconds. That's the pick it up, and then you talk right away, okay? That's how fast this is, because control channels are always talking to a radio. It's usually like a cell phone. And if they're digital, then what can happen in the digital aspect of things, you can even get signal reports. You can see like, hey, I got more bars, more places, right? But I wanted to cover that with trunking, because now as we move into our examples the rest of today, we're going to be looking at this. We're going to say that there's a UHF trunk system, but we are going to DMR it. Alrighty. So now what is tier 3 trunking for DMR? Well, tier 3 trunking for DMR is, in sake of a better term, using trunking technology to say, how can we make the usage of a DMR system more effective? Just like tier 2 would happen with analog repeaters, if your time slots are busy or your repeaters are busy, then you can't communicate. But here's the beauty of DMR trunking. Because DMR is two slots, what you can do is you can now take a look at the system, and the slots will now open it up. So if we have 3 repeaters, normally that would be a 3-channel trunk system and using like FDMA with P25 or something like that. Now with DMR, since each repeater has a slot, that 3-channel repeated system now becomes a 6-channel trunked system. And what's going to happen then is your radio is going to sit on a control channel listening for the data. And then what's going to happen is when you key up, the control channel is going to direct your radio to transmit on a certain voice channel. And then the other users will do it. In addition, it does support some data modes, so short messaging and what have you. And we'll talk about that as the different networks that come up in a minute here. But this is basically what DMR trunking is. Now, once again, look at the standard. It basically is doing 66 megahertz to 960 megahertz. And if you've ever heard of it, there's, excuse me, a technology called MPT 1327. And that is an analog trunking technology. Really cool, really super cool. In my opinion, that would be the next. If amateur was ever going to go trunking, totally, I would push MPT 1327. Anyways, so this is there's some standards on it. So once again, ETSI is wanted to saying, we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do it right. Alrighty. So that's kind of the standard of DMR tier 3 trunking. But as I said earlier, remember, Motorola's got to put a spin on it, of course, right? And they came out with Capacity Plus, Connect Plus, and Capacity Max. Now, the reason I wanted to specifically touch on these tonight is because if you are a scanner listener, especially now with Uniden, you can buy DMR upgrades now to the scanner. And I mean, like even cost-effective scanners now that are like $300 or so, you can get a DMR upgrade for like $50-$75, and you can start listening to these DMR trunked systems. Okay. And what ended up happening is that for a while there, you could only really, if you wanted to listen to a DMR system that was trunked, you had to do poor man's trunking. It was really what it was. And that was basically saying, okay, I'm going to program, let's go back here real quick. If I wanted to, I'd have to program all 3 repeaters and both time slots. So in essence, I'd have to have 6 frequencies in my radio and I have to scan. Well, guess what? My radio may not be a trunking radio. It may only be a tier 2 radio, not a tier 3 radio. So guess what? Can't hear it. Can't do anything on there, right? So Motorola said, hey, let's do this. Let's come up with some different standards. And Uniden said, yeah, let's do it because it's there. So Motorola came up with Capacity Plus, Linked Capacity Plus, and Connect Plus. Now, Connect Plus became Capacity Max on there. So we'll get to all that in one second. Don't worry about it. But this is the cool part, folks. This is really going to be the cool part. I love trunking. I totally hands down trunking. My background, I got into, really got into the radio tech world because I went upstairs and I fixed a LTR system that other technicians that were on the job for 5-6 years couldn't do it. So kind of the Goodwill Hunting kind of thing. So anyways, okay. Looking at DMR tier 3. So we're talking now about Motorola Capacity Plus trunking. This is technically not a DMR tier 3 standard. It is not. It's under the guise of a DMR tier 3 standard because there is what they say control channel. But it's not really a control channel. It's a rest channel. That's what Motorola calls it. But then Uniden, they call it a logic channel on there. What does that mean? Well, here's what it means. So you have these 3 radios, and it's sitting on this trunked radio system, right? What's happening is the radios are sitting on what they call a rest channel. And this rest channel acts like a control channel. Alrighty? And what happens is that the first radio that keys up will then use that rest channel and turn it into a voice channel. And now, as we see from the picture here, those other 2 radios, which are not transmitting, so the blue ones, they are now going to move to the next rest channel. So here we see radio number 1 keyed up. That's what the red arrow is. Hey, they were using the rest channel of repeater 1, time slot 1. Now they're talking, hey, everybody else that's busy, you're going to go to the next one that's going to be the rest channel. In this case, just argument's sake, it doesn't always happen this way. Repeater 1, time slot 2 is the next rest channel. So, wait. How's this work? So what happens is that the system will automatically assign a time slot. And all of these repeaters are connected together, like with a router and Ethernet cables and everything like that on there. And what's happening is that the system knows, and the radios are programmed to know, to say, hey, if repeater 1, time slot 1 is the rest channel, and it busies out, we are now going to look to repeater number X and time slot X. Now, the reason I said it X and X is because, once again, the system administrators, the designers, they can have it whatever you want. So, for an example, they could have repeater number 1. Whoop, went too far, sorry. They could have repeater number 1 here, okay, time slot 1 as the rest channel, and then they're going to say, you know what, if there's another if someone starts using repeater 1 time slot 1, I want the rest channel now to be repeater 2 time slot 2. And then if repeater 2 time slot 2 is busy, I want it to be repeater 3 in time slot 1. The reason they did that is because if you mix up the channel numbers, then you have a greater chance of someone not coming in and hacking the system on there. And then the channel can flow a little bit easier on there. So instead of always busying out one repeater, you can actually then start to circulate repeaters through. So for an example, once again, repeater 1 time slot 1 is the rest channel. Maybe they want to go repeater 2 time slot 1 for the second rest channel and start to put time on the systems on there. Because once again, otherwise repeater 1 is always transmitting on that time slot for, in essence, the logic channel for that rest channel, because it's always got to transmit, because that's how the radios know that you're affiliated to the system. So that is what they call capacity plus. Now, capacity plus also has the ability to be linked capacity plus. So Motorola came out and says, you know what? Hey, let's go ahead and link all this stuff together. Let's make it all work in one nice thing. So here we have a picture. We have repeaters at one site on the left-hand side. We have repeaters at another site, separate frequencies and everything like that. But in the system, they are designed to be repeaters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And each one has a time slot, right? So what's happening in this case is that, once again, a lot going on in a picture. Left-hand side, the red radio, the red arrow radio is talking on repeater 1, time slot 1. And now the second radio not being used, not transmitting, not receiving, it's going to the rest channel, repeater 1, time slot 2. Now what's happening is that on the right-hand side, we have something similar. So that red user is actually talking to the other red user on a different site, and they're using repeater 6, time slot 2. Alrighty? So now what has to happen in this case is that it needs to connect with one another. They need to work with one another. So what it's doing is doing that concept of IP site connect, as we talked about, where we have the repeaters and those talk groups all together. And now what's happening is with link capacity plus, now we're basically saying we have a trunk system over here, we have a trunk system over here, we have a trunk system here. And now they're going to connect via the internet. And now what we're going to do is we're going to figure out who needs to talk to who, and more importantly, who the radio needs to listen to. So in this case, the radio needs to listen to a specific repeater. All right, it's really, really confusing. The capacity plus really it is really confusing. It's great if you have a small thing. So like, let's take for example, Mall of America. That's a great example of a capacity plus system. I don't know if they're capacity plus or not. Bad example, but a mall, housekeeping of not a housekeeping, but a hotel service or something, where you need to have a bunch of people talk together, and you're going to be using a multiple repeaters. You can add that trunked radio system in there. All right, so now let's go to Motorola capacity max trunking. Now Motorola calls it capacity max, but it actually is DMR tier 3 compliant. And what happens with this setup is that in this compliance aspect of things, you have a control channel. So it's not like we just talked about, which is a rest channel. This control channel is one of the repeaters, one of the time slots, 24/7. It's just spewing out data 24/7. Basically, when you turn a radio on, the radio's looking for the system. Hey, I hear the system. The radio will check in saying, hey, system, I am this radio with this ID in this system. Can I get on the system? And the system will say, yes, you can, or no, you can't, and does all that. That's what the control channel is for and all about. But as you see with a capacity max or a DMR tier 3 standard trunk system, what it's nice to do is now you can have voice and data channels. So what's happening here is that you have a control channel, but now you see from the picture there's a voice slot, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in essence, on the system, 5 voice channels can be taking place at one time. So 5 independent voice conversations, communications are taking place all at once. What is data slot 1 and data slot 2? Well, guess what? That's where you can now start to incorporate some of the advantages of having a digital radio or digital system. You can send GPS tracking. You could send text messaging. You could send whatever you think that you can hook up to some of this stuff on there. I've even heard there's people that are working on interfaces or there's interface to be able to actually take and like scan a credit card or take process on a payment or something and then send it up via data on DMR through a system like this. So lots of different options that exist for there. But the concept is pretty much sort of the same thing. What happens is people are going to sit on that control channel. The minute there's a conversation or someone keys up, that user will be assigned to a voice slot. In this case, for an example, we're sitting on control channel. The system said, let's go to voice slot 3 on there. So voice slot 3 is just argument's sake. Could be whatever. Once again, systems are designed different ways, different strokes, different folks, all those kind of things on there. So really, is there a rhyme or reason to it? No. When you're using it from a scanner aspect, that's when it really kind of comes into play is to know the control channel trunking, and then the scanner can then start to disseminate what talk group you want to listen to and then go from there. And once the channels are all done, then they go back to sitting on the rest channel. So that's kind of the 3 different tiers about DMR. And it comes to our weekly topic or weekly part. You know what really bends my antenna? You know what really bends my antenna is the concept of DMR and why DMR is good and why DMR is bad. And what I mean by that is that, in essence, DMR is nothing more than a technology and a highway, as we've kind of talked about and made the reference on there. And a highway is only going to be good as the vehicles that are traveling down a highway. And this plays a lot into the business world, and it kind of does a little bit too into the amateur world. And what I mean by that is that you can have the best DMR network, infrastructure, repeater, and everything like that on there. But if you're going to go ahead and use bad DMR radios or crappy DMR radios or DMR radios not set up, guess what? You will have unbelievable amounts of failure. And to the point where, guess what? If you're in the business world, you'll be tired of it and you will say, I do not want DMR whatsoever. In the amateur world, you will say DMR is stupid and I don't want to go ahead and use it on there. Should you use DMR versus another digital voice technology for business or amateur usage? Well, that's totally up to you. The issue that comes into play here is that we need to be aware and conscientious on the equipment that we're using. As I've said in different episodes and stuff like that, the network is only going to be as sufficient as the vehicles that are traveling down it, or the vehicles or radios in this case that are going to be used on it. Once again, if you're using bad radios, if you don't have radios set up correctly and everything, it's just not going to go ahead and work. It is not a simple plug and play situation. It is not. DMR was not designed to be a simple plug and play. If you want to make an argument that it was, then you're talking about tier 1, where it's simplex on radio to radio. Using repeaters, setting them up, time slot 1, time slot 2, color codes, talk groups, all that kind of thing like that on there, that can be pretty aggravating, that can be pretty unnerving, and it actually can be pretty rewarding. The difference that that's going to do is going to come into the education. Education is going to be key on any radio system that you use, whether it be for business, amateur, personal, whatever the case may be. If you are going to be of the mindset of, hey, radio training consisted of I'm turning on a knob and then I'm going ahead and turning to the talk group, you are doing yourself no good. I'm going to tell you that, and that's my opinion. I'm sorry if you got mad, but you are doing yourself no good. Telling people to go to channel 1, 2, or 3 will work in your normal day-to-day operations. Telling people to go to repeater 1, 2, or 3 will do that. But as you see here from tonight's episode, DMR is a complex network that can have great benefits and can have great drawbacks and can have great confusion on there. Does this mean that other ones should be looked at and used? No, it really doesn't. We're going to discuss other ones as we come up in the next couple of weeks here. But the thing about it is to make sure that you do your due diligence and you know how to operate the system and you know how the system to work. That, I guarantee you, will give you many days, hours, weeks, months, whatever, of enjoyment. And guess what? That's tonight's episode of Demystify DMR. So I hope it's kind of good. Like I said, we're going to be doing in the next episode, we're actually going to be diving into a little bit, and dare I say it, we are going to look at the programming of DMR. Yes, the evil programming of DMR. I will tell you this. don't copy code plugs. We're going to talk about that next week, but be your own ham, be your own user if you can on there. We're going to talk about programming DMR, and you're going to kind of see how this stuff will come into play, will come into work, and you can actually see, we'll actually show you how it will connect to a repeater, how it connects and does all that great stuff on there. So for this week's episode of Communications Cigars, thank you everybody for attending and showing in tonight. Thank you for bearing with me for having last week off there. If you have cigars, as I always say, sit back and enjoy them. 73, stay safe, and we'll catch you next week.